Today I wanted to look at some clips of Odd and LARRATT going up against Kings movers. I always find this really interesting to see Kings movers going up against other Kings movers, because obviously they would know what feels terrible, what their opponent does to them in order to beat them, so they can use that same strategy. They know all the secrets, all the tricks to defeating the Kings mover. So I think seeing Auden go up against some of these guys using the Kings move is going to be very interesting and very telling as to what he thinks is the best way to defeat this move. And I think that there's a really clear trend. We're going to see Auden go up against 2 or 3 different guys here using a King's move, or at least a very open outside strategy. And I think that what we see him doing over and over again is we're going to see Auden fighting his opponent on the B side of the table, or on the losing side of the table, on purpose. One of the things about the King's move is that it really only has power if you give it power. So as Auden hits to the side here and he stretches out his opponent, this may look like it's good for Auden, but really what he's doing is he's increasing the efficiency of his opponents. He's giving his opponent access to that bone lock, to that really rotating, twisting, torquing pronation that they wouldn't have access to otherwise, and also to quite a bit of up pressure, quite a bit of stopping power through that elbow. And his opponent is rotating his shoulder, he's getting below the table. He's gaining a lot of access to power that he simply does not have in this position right here. So in other words, in this position right here, Auden's opponent is significantly stronger than in this position right here. Additionally, his opponent has much more access to skeletal structure. So he's much more efficient. He has better effective endurance than he does right here. Right here, Auden is fighting a lot more musculature versus skeletal structure in the other position. And we can see that this is going to gas his opponent out more, and this is what's giving Auden more access to fight what he wants to fight. Now in this first round, interestingly enough, we see Auden drop into the King's move himself, and I'm not sure if this is the exact strategy he would normally use, but it's hard to tell because he may be very gassed out. His elbow flexor might be very gassed out in practice. So Auden decides to go with the double King's move in this first round. And we see him trying to essentially control the top ground, trying to get his knuckle height higher than his opponent's and force his opponent to hold on to him. And Auden is going to slowly start winning the battle of rotation in the center. His opponent starts out with more of a high knuckle position. And I think even what happens here is potentially there's a little bit of a trap that is set. And you'll notice that Auden's opponent begins to go on the offensive. And as soon as that happens, his opponent is now applying down pressure. And he's trying to go for that pin. And as soon as that happens, now Auden is no longer the one that's holding on. His opponent is holding on to him. Auden is applying up pressure. His opponent is applying down pressure. And that is the moment where Auden takes full control of the high ground. And the battle of who is holding on to who completely shifts. And you can see the hand control has just totally swung on Auden's favor now. And there's not a lot left for his opponent. And his opponent is going to be forced to transition to a different move just here in a second. Auden is now on the offensive with much better position. His opponent tries to come up and use a flop press. And it's pretty close, but it's just not going to be quite enough. So that's a very interesting way to deal with a flop presser, potentially if you were significantly more tired out. But now we're going to see what I would think of as a little bit more of a traditional way to do this. So we see Auden once again versus a very open style top roller, someone who clearly has access to a King's move. And what we're going to see Auden do here is very similar to the strategy Devin implemented against Denis Saplinkov. We see him hitting to the side, but notice how Auden does not hit too far. He doesn't really give the King's mover access to that super sticky spot that's right next to the pin pad, and not just sticky in terms of up pressure, but also in terms of pronation. Auden never cracks his own wrist back. If he ever feels like he might be going a little bit too far and his wrist might be about to be challenged, he returns to not only the center of the table, but actually to the losing side of the table. And he's going to just start working through this range of motion. You can see him essentially forcing his opponent to do bicep curls repeatedly. He hits a little bit further that time and he goes extremely far back now. And he's forcing his opponent through a range of motion. But notice that Auden's elbow flexor angle is static. It's never changing. So anytime your angle is opening and closing, but your opponent's is staying the same, you're almost always going to be more efficient, have better endurance, and your opponent's going to get super pumped up and they're going to lose a lot of power. So as this round goes on, we're just going to see Aden's opponent get gassed out more so and more so, and then he has the ability to rip through that one more time, and that's going to be an easy pin for Auden LARRATT. We'll take a look at one more here. This time this is much more so of an inside initiation, but there's still a lot of access to this sticky spot right next to the pin pad. Auden is having a little bit of trouble finishing, so this is going to be a very similar strategy, but it's going to involve a little bit more climbing and regripping this time. Notice how once Auden feels that he's unable to finish, it's not going to be just an easy pin, and there is access to this king's move. He's going to come back up to the top, and I would say even the losing side of the table, and he's potentially sweeping back outside in this direction now, kind of toward his opponent's hand peg, and he's going to be able to attack his fingertips. And we're going to see Auden doing some regrips, and he's going to allow this angle to be super closed and then rip through it again. And notice again how Auden's angle is staying very, very static throughout this time, but his opponent's angle is going from super closed to almost all the way open. So he's forcing him to do an eccentric bicep curl. So potentially Auden could continue to implement this strategy, and then every time he came back up to the top, he could climb a little bit more, and eventually he would be able to go all the way up and over the top of him. But this time we see Auden finish in a slightly different way because he was able to stretch his opponent's bicep out so much. We see him bring his shoulder forward, go for the flop press. He gives his opponent access to his pronation, but then he just simply crashes down with the shoulder pressure. And this flop press is also extremely efficient, so it's going to be really great to use against a king's mover if you're trying to win over a lot of rounds. So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on what you could potentially do versus a king's mover. We saw Auden use more than one technique here, all of which I think are super good options, and I think it's always really beneficial to watch someone go up against a puller who uses a move that they are also proficient in, because of course they're going to know how to beat their own move. And I think that's what we saw from Auden. He's giving us a lot of very useful information as to how to defeat a king's mover. And if we do end up seeing Auden versus Ryan Bowen at some point in the future, I think this would be really interesting to watch this play out.